My role is around setting flows in rivers to maintain in-stream values like like galaxids or trout, but also looking to maintain human values like irrigation or recreation and things like that, and sort of finding a bit of a balance between the two.
And what do you think are the main things that people need to know about Otago galaxies?
I think the fact that they're actually there and they exist is probably the most important thing, because a lot of people don't realise it. So I think firstly people need to know that they're there, and secondly they need to know that they are in trouble and what's causing that trouble. Would be probably the more important messages to get across. And you find once people know and understand what's happening, they're more than happy to help or support the work that we do. Not many people will go out of their way to do harm to these fish. It's just more that they don't know, and probably the most important thing to do is actually just to let them know that they're there. Yeah. Trout predation is definitely the main problems that both those species are facing. Trout very slowly over the past 100 or so years have been working their way up into different creeks, and really the only populations of these non-migratories that are existing in areas where trout are absent or in very low numbers. So I mean, what we're doing now is trying to maintain those barriers that are keeping trout from getting up there. But just occasionally one will get up, and then the population's gone. We've probably had half of the populations in the Cadrona disappear over the past 10 years because of trout getting into the creeks that they're living in. And the main thing we need to do is identify these populations, make sure we know where they are, and then from there it's reinforcing those barriers that are keeping them safe at the moment. So that might be increasing the height of waterfalls by putting some dams on them, which is mainly done by Department of Conservation, but we will certainly support them in that work. And the other thing, again led by DOC but supported by us, that we may be looking at in the future is actually is taking some of the populations that are in trouble and relocating them into areas where they might be a bit more protected, so above big waterfalls where we know there's no trout. Yeah. That hasn't been done yet, but that's something we'll be looking at over the next few years. Where there's never been any trout, the galaxids will swim right in the middle of the water column and drift feed, just like a trout does. You see them all out in the open in big schools, just sort of cruising around, just drift feeding right throughout the whole water column, even sipping things off the surface. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's a population that's had trout there, they're all hiding under the rocks, and they only come out at night really to feed, because they know if they stick their head above the rocks they're going to get bitten off by trout. So it changes their behaviour quite a bit, and the adults can't survive where trout are anyway. So the only way you can increase the galaxid population is by removing the trout. There's no rivers where there's a good trout fishery where there's threatened galaxids that we can actually manage. So there's no galaxid management that we would do that would have a negative impact on a trout fishery. The two don't really overlap at all. So there is really no situation where we would be removing an adult trout fishery or even a spawning area just to look after galaxids. It wouldn't happen. They're physically separated at the moment. A lot of the work that Fish and Game does is aimed to protect ecosystems or protect rivers, with the idea that if they protect the river then the trout will be looked after anyway. So that works for native fish as well. If you protect an ecosystem, then the things in that ecosystem by and large should be okay. So from that perspective we work, our aims are very similar to Fish and Game. There's some situations where trout and galaxids might be directly competing, but we'll just talk to them about that basically. And so far anyway, we've always got agreement that galaxids are important in this particular area, and the trout aren't so important, so we can focus our management strategies on the galaxids. We've never had a direct competition between the two. It may happen in the future, who knows? But the Department Department of Conservation have got a memorandum of understanding with DOC that in areas where there's low trout numbers and low trout values, but important galaxid values, that they can look to get rid of the trout. And that's something that I'm pretty sure they've already agreed on.
Yeah,
and so we're along similar lines with that as well. I think the reality of the situation is that trout are here to stay no matter what we think of them. It's just not possible at all to eradicate them from most rivers. I think now they're an important part of New Zealand's identity. New Zealand's well known as a trout fishing destination. It's important for the tourism industry. So I think it's a shame that some native species are in a lot of trouble because of trout. But I don't think that's a reason to be anti-trout as such. In the right situation, if you can remove them, that's great. But I think now they are an important resource to New Zealand and to New Zealanders. So yeah, they're here to stay. About the only thing that would happen if we found a galaxid in a river that was on a farm is we might want to make sure that there's no stock in the water. So we want to fence off the water so cattle and whatever can't get in. But that they need to do that anyway, regardless of whether or not there's fish in there. They can't have stock in the waterway damaging the waterway at all. That is illegal under our current plan, regardless of what fish are there. So it doesn't really impact them at all if they're following the law in the first place. 50 to 60% might know that they exist somewhere, but only 10 to 20% would know whether or not they're actually on their farm or not. Times when we can actually get sort of win-win situations. If a farmer wants to continue irrigating the same way, if we can find a way to maintain their values, but also look after galaxids or other fish at the same time, then that's probably the most satisfying part of it. The other thing that worries me about galaxids or native fish in general is that they don't actually have any legal protection. Under the Resource Management Act, there's only a small section about protecting their spawning habitat. But if someone shot a kakapo, for example, they would be prosecuted, or a seal or something like that. But native fish don't have any kind of protection. So you could legally destroy an entire population of galaxids, and as long as you didn't affect their spawning habitat, it would be perfectly legal for you to do that. So I think a strengthening of the national regulations within the RMA would be a very big step forward into doing that, because habitat destruction is also quite important for some of the species. There's really no protection for them, no legal protection for them at the moment at all, and I think that would be probably my biggest concern. Within our regional plan, we have rules around digging up waterways or taking too much water. We have rules around that, but that varies between regional councils as to how much protection there actually is. It's not consistent, and there's no direction from central government to give any of that protection. The RMA is when it's applied properly is a much more robust and stronger tool than a regional plan. So if you've got the Resource Management Act or the Wildlife Act, it may well be, that gives national direction and gives direction to regional plans as well, and it adds to the strength of the regional plans. I think that will end up giving a lot more protection than just the regional plans alone. Because essentially for that you're relying on one or two staff and a bunch of politicians, local politicians, and I really don't think, considering how important they are, I don't think that's enough, and more should be done on that front. So we're losing them faster than we're finding them, by a long way.
Yeah. Sad.
It is, yeah. But it's a matter of identifying the ones that we can got the best chance of protecting. There'll be some that are sort of marginal that we can't really do a lot to help, but they're still there, and hopefully they can just keep going for as long as they can. But if we identify the ones where we really can do something to help, and identify those early and protect them as early as possible, and that's the best chance that those species have got to keep going.